Nero, draped in purple robes, crowned with gold, strides proudly through the forum. By his side walks his new bride, a vision of beauty clothed in silks, her face delicate, her body adorned with jewels from the farthest corners of the empire. The crowd watches in silence, some cheer, some whisper, because they know the truth. That woman beside the emperor is not who she seems. She was once a boy named Sporus, and what Nero did to him remains one of the most disturbing, haunting, and tragic stories in all of history. This is not a love story. This is not romance. This is obsession, grief, cruelty, and madness. A story of how absolute power can transform human beings into objects, and how a boy was forced to live as the shadow of a dead empress. Stay with me, because once you hear Sporus's story, you'll never see Rome or Nero the same way again. But before we dive in, do me a favor, drop a comment telling me what time it is where you're watching from. I love seeing our community connect from all over the world as we uncover the hidden truths of the past together. When Nero Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus became emperor in 54 AD, Rome held its breath. He was only 16 years old, a boy ruling over 60 million people, and at first he seemed to be everything the people hoped for. He cut unfair taxes, he opened public baths, theaters, and games for the masses. He even gave speeches promising peace, prosperity, and a brighter future. The philosopher Seneca, who had tutored Nero since childhood, guided him toward ideals of wisdom and justice. The young emperor presented himself not as a tyrant, but as a patron of art, music, and poetry. For a while the people adored him. They called it the dawn of a golden age. But behind the charm, Nero was fragile. His childhood had been poisoned by palace politics. His mother, Agrippina the Younger, was ambitious and ruthless. She had schemed to put her son on the throne, even marrying her own uncle, the Emperor Claudius, to secure Nero's succession. Once he became emperor, Agrippina expected to rule through him, but Nero was tired of being his mother's puppet. Their relationship turned bitter, violent, and finally deadly. In 59 AD, Nero ordered his mother's assassination. Ancient sources describe elaborate attempts to disguise the murder boats, designed to collapse and drown her, staged accidents, but in the end she was simply killed on his orders. The young emperor had crossed a line. Rome's golden boy had killed the woman who gave him life, and from that moment on, something inside Nero began to unravel. Among the glittering women of Rome's elite, one stood out above all others, Poppaea Sabina. She was beautiful, clever, and ambitious. Unlike most Roman women who played quiet roles in the background of politics, Poppaea was bold. She knew how to use her charm to gain influence, and she had her eyes on the ultimate prize, the emperor. When Nero first met her, he was trapped in a loveless marriage with Octavia, the daughter of the previous emperor Claudius. Octavia was noble, modest, and quiet, but she lacked the fire that Nero craved. Poppaea had that fire. Their affair scandalized Rome, but Nero didn't care. He divorced Octavia, executed her soon after on false charges, and married Poppaea in a ceremony of unmatched extravagance. He showered her with jewels, silks, perfumes, and portraits. He adored her, obsessed over her, consumed her. Yet Poppaea was not simply a prize. She was intelligent, politically savvy, and unafraid to speak her mind, even to the emperor. She advised him on policy, mocked him when his performances on stage were poor, and challenged him in ways no one else dared. But this independence came at a terrible cost. In 65 AD, while pregnant with their second child, Poppaea argued with Nero. Ancient historians disagree on the cause. Some say he came home late from the races. Others claim she mocked his obsession with performing on stage. Whatever the truth, Nero snapped. In a fit of rage, he struck her. Some say he kicked her in the abdomen, so violently that she collapsed and died, along with her unborn child. The emperor, who commanded armies, who could kill anyone with a word, had murdered the one person he truly loved. Nero's grief was overwhelming and twisted. He embalmed Poppaea's body rather than burn it, built her a lavish tomb, declared her divine, and created a cult in her honor. He spoke to her corpse as if she were still alive. But no matter how many tears he shed, Poppaea was gone. And in Nero's broken mind, that loss became an obsession that would lead him to Sporus. Sporus was young, probably only 14 or 15, born a slave, later freed. He had grown up in the palace. He was educated, intelligent, and by all accounts, handsome. But what caught Nero's eye was something chilling. Sporus looked strikingly like Poppaea Sabina. The same delicate features, the same soft eyes, the same bone structure that haunted Nero's memories. In that moment, Nero saw not a boy, but a chance to undo the past. There was only one problem. Sporus was male. But to Nero, a man who believed himself divine, who spoke to the corpse of his wife, this was no obstacle. He would simply change Sporus into what he wanted. And so Nero ordered physicians to perform a castration. Ancient surgery was brutal. With crude tools, little knowledge of sterilization, and minimal anesthetics, the procedure was agony. Sporus was mutilated, his body altered forever. He would never be able to live as a man again. This was not just physical violence, it was psychological destruction. Sporus's very identity was stolen. He was stripped of manhood, stripped of choice, stripped of a future. Nero then renamed him Sabina, after Poppaea herself. He dressed Sporus in women's clothes, taught him to walk, talk, and behave like an empress. Hairdressers styled him for hours. Tutors instructed him in feminine gestures. Jewelers adorned him with Poppaea's own ornaments. Day by day, Sporus was erased, replaced by the ghost of a dead woman. Then, Nero announced the unthinkable. He would marry Sporus. The imperial palace was decorated with flowers and torches. Musicians played wedding songs. Senators, generals, and courtiers gathered, their faces masks of forced joy. In a full Roman ceremony, Nero took Sporus's hand, exchanged vows, and sealed the marriage with sacred rites. Rome's emperor had married a boy he had mutilated into the likeness of his dead wife, and no one dared to object. From that day forward, Sporus lived as the empress. He had attendants, wealth, and a palace household. But it was all a gilded prison. Every day, he had to act the role of Poppaea. Every smile, every gesture, every memory he pretended to share with Nero, it was all theater. In 66 AD, Nero traveled to Greece to perform in theaters and festivals. Obsessed with being seen as a great artist, he forced audiences to cheer his singing and acting. And always by his side was Sporus, dressed as a queen. Foreign dignitaries whispered in disbelief, but they obeyed. No one dared laugh at the emperor who controlled the armies of Rome. For Sporus, this tour was humiliation on a global stage. He was paraded not as a person, but as a prop in Nero's performance of grief and madness. But Nero's theatrics came at a cost. While he performed, Rome burned. While he sang, governors rebelled. By 68 AD, the empire rose against him. The Senate declared him a public enemy. Even his own Praetorian Guard abandoned him. Nero fled Rome with only a handful of loyalists. Sporus was among them. Imagine the terror of those final days, the emperor plotting escapes, ranting about conspiracies, and rehearsing speeches he would never deliver. Finally, cornered by his enemies, Nero chose suicide. "What an artist dies in me," he is said to have cried. He stabbed himself, ending his reign in blood. But for Sporus, the nightmare did not end. He was too well known, too infamous to escape notice. He was claimed by Otho, one of Nero's successors, who treated him as his own empress. Then by Vitellius, another emperor in Rome's chaotic year of civil war. Again and again, Sporus was passed from ruler to ruler, like a prized possession. Never free, never himself, always Poppaea, always the doll. Vitellius planned Sporus's ultimate degradation. He intended to force him to appear in the arena, reenacting the myth of Persephone, the goddess carried into the underworld, before a jeering crowd. This meant public violation, humiliation, and destruction before thousands. Sporus could not bear it. He had been mutilated, enslaved, and paraded as a ghost. But this final act was too much, and so before he could be dragged into the arena, Sporus took his own life, probably by poison. He was no more than 20 years old. In death, at last, he reclaimed the one thing no emperor could take from him, his choice. Sporus's story is rarely told in detail. Ancient historians wrote about him not with sympathy, but as a symbol of Nero's excess. To them, he was proof of the empire's corruption. But when we look closer, we see a human tragedy, a boy whose identity was stolen, whose body was mutilated, whose life was consumed by the madness of one man. It is a story of how absolute power dehumanizes, not just its victims, but also its wielders. Nero believed he was reviving love. In truth, he destroyed everything it meant to be human. And yet in Sporus's final act of defiance, in choosing death over humiliation, we glimpse resilience. Even after years of erasure, some part of him remained, a part strong enough to say no. That choice is his legacy. Sporus was not a hero, not a warrior, not a senator. He was a boy, caught in the jaws of history, who became the unwilling shadow of an empress. His story reminds us that behind Rome's marble monuments and imperial grandeur, there were lives broken, twisted, and forgotten. If this story moved you, let me know in the comments. What do you think Sporus's life tells us about power, obsession, and survival? And if you enjoy uncovering the darkest, most hidden corners of history, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next chapter we explore together. Until next time, remember, history is not just about emperors and battles, it's about the human stories that still echo across 2,000 years.